Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
And I'm your host, Brad Jevons, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia. We are proudly brought to you in association with SA Partners, a world-leading business transformation consultancy. SA Partners are a truly purposeful company focused on helping organisations achieve sustainable improvement for themselves, others, and the planet.
Hi everyone, I've got Dr. Mark Williams back on the show with us today to talk on habit change and how to form ideal behaviours and how to lead transformation in culture. It's such a great episode, like an important topic. Enterprise excellence is about us all just improving every day to reach our potential and through that the organisation for the greater good. To help with this, we've loaded up a template that can help you review key behaviours and monitor and discuss and plan improvement on those going forward. It's called the Key Behaviour Review Form. You can go to the website enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com, downloads to get hold of it. Let's get to the episode. Welcome to episode 153 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. As promised, we have Dr. Mark Williams back on the show with us today to continue on the conversation we started in episode 149. It's such a pleasure to have Mark back on. We're talking on a very important topic of habit and how to actually alter habit to move towards enterprise excellence and create better outcomes. So, Mark, thank you so much for coming back on the show, mate.
Oh, it's great to see you again, Brad. Thanks for having me back.
Appreciate it, mate. Now, to set the scene, we last episode spoke about free will and a bit on do we have the capability to alter our our direction or not. And then before the show guests, Mark and I were talking about the two parts to enterprise excellence, really, the behavioral and cultural bit, and especially leadership behavior. And then also the system side, how do we run processes, on board people, train people, deploy and execute strategy, do projects, all that processes and systems part and how they're connected at the hip. But Mark, the thing I got of a question on this, I want to open up because we're talking on habit here. How do you go about altering a habit to be able to get better at our behavior and get improved systems and adapt systems? Because as we've spoken about, it's very easy to just stay in free will and just stay in that traditional habit or influence from the social or the people around us.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brad. And we actually learned a huge amount about habits after the Vietnam War of all times, because habits and addiction are actually exactly the same thing. So addictions are just habits that have got really severe and are having a clinical impact on your life. But from a brain point of view, they're exactly the same. And prior to the Vietnam War, addiction is still really hard to cure. But prior to the Vietnam War, we were really bad at curing addictions, because what we would do is we'd take someone who had an addiction, we'd put them into a hospital or into a rehab centre. We'd get them off the drug or whatever it was that they were addicted to. Then we'd send them home, and about 95 to 98% of people would then become addicted again pretty much instantaneously. And so what we realised, because of Vietnam War, a lot of vets came back from the Vietnam War and they're actually drug addicts. They got addicted to drugs over there because of the awful situation they were thrown in and a bunch of other things. There's also a bunch of conspiracy theories around that as well. But there was a lot of drugs during the Vietnam War, and a lot of the veterans came back and they've been addicted over there. But they basically cured themselves overnight and never went back to it. There was some who had PTSD and things like that didn't, but the vast majority of them were cured basically overnight and never went back to those addictions. So that made us realise that it's not actually the substance itself or the behaviour itself that is actually what you become addicted to or what the habit is. It's actually the cue. So there's always a cue that actually triggers that behaviour or triggers that thought. And that's actually the really crucial thing to get rid of a bad habit. So you've got to get rid of the cue rather than the actual drug or the behavior or the thought. And that was like an amazing explosion in the research in this area, because we then realized that what you've got is you've got a cue that sets off the behaviour, this automatic behaviour, which then gets reinforced, which then makes the cue and behaviour link stronger. And so the best way to get rid of a habit is, as I said, just get rid of the cue. And in the case of course, Vietnam, the cue was being in war and being in Vietnam and in the jungle and all those things. And that's what cued them to actually be taking the drugs. And so once they were back in Australia or in America and so on, they didn't have that cue anymore. So they were no longer would do that habit or do that behaviour. So what we've got to always think about is, what is the cue that's causing that behaviour? And I think this is where a lot of people fall down when they do changes within organisations, is they come up with the processes for the new whatever it is that you want the people to do, but then they don't look at the environment that they're in that's actually cueing the behaviour that you actually want to get rid of. And so what you've got to do is get rid of those behaviours you want to get rid of, and then you've got to cue the new behaviours with things that are in that environment already. And Google do it amazingly by actually, one of the things they do is they have different areas in Google where they'll have people move to different areas to do different things, or to do involved in different things. So they'll have areas where you do brainstorming, you do collaboration, and where you can be noisy and so on. And they're set out in really nice ways with boards and all the rest of it. So you can do that. So you walk into that environment and you're cued to do that behavior. But they'll have other areas which are quiet areas where people, get into flow states and so on. And so there, everyone's quiet. As soon as you walk in there, it's all quiet. So you're cued to be quiet and to think, really deeply about things and so on. So they do it well by doing that and by having really, very expensive furniture and all the rest of it, which cues these different areas as to what you're actually supposed to be doing. But yeah, that's the basic premise of any habit. And so if you want to get rid of the habit, or if you want to actually start a new habit by creating a really easy, or creating a cue or using a cue that's already in your environment, will actually help to establish that habit. So, and also, if you can't do that, then what you got to do is make the habit really hard to do, and then you won't do it, or make it really easy to do, and then you will do it. And again, that's where a lot of these changes, fall down, because all of a sudden they'll have a whole different system that someone has to learn, and that's much harder than just doing what you were doing before. And so people fall back into just doing what they were doing before, rather than spending time to learn this new thing that they've now got to do instead. So you've got to make that really easy to do.
Yeah, Mark, I'm sort of reflecting on what you've said, and I think strategically I knew with an executive team I worked with to never take them into their boardroom to have a meeting if you want to talk about anything positive, because in that environment their hackles are up and they're badgering each other and they're dropping bombs. And so I knew instinctively, don't take them into that environment, because otherwise their hackles are going to straight away go up. Is that a similar
That's a beautiful example. Yeah, no, that's a beautiful example. Because again, it's the cue of walking into that boardroom, which is, this is where we're combative. And so therefore, whenever they walk into that boardroom, they're going to be combative, because that cues them for that behavior, and they're being reinforced for it constantly. And so it's going to happen every time. And that's why, a lot of organizations will take groups on retreats, right? Because all of a sudden they're in a completely different environment, so they don't have any of those cues and all the rest of it. So, but often retreats will be done in nice hotels and stuff, and of course that cues other behaviours which aren't good, and aren't getting stuff done. So, but yeah, that's a beautiful example. I love that one. That's really cool.
So, Mark, in that example of that boardroom, would one approach be to alter where the leadership team meet, or alter the boardroom and use that alteration of the boardroom or new place to meet to set down new behaviours? Because
absolutely. Yeah, sorry, bro.
That's one approach.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So actually moving that.
Do you mind if I throw another curly one at you, mate? And this could be a tough one. I actually this morning just recorded a podcast with Mark Grabham that will be coming out 1 week before ours, this one. And Mark was talking about mistakes and how what a leader does when someone makes a mistake or has a problem is a really defining moment. Their tone, their body language, their words will either set the tone that this place is psychologically safe and please raise ideas and issues, and we're not going to blame you, and we're going to work together or we're going to, really empower you and even celebrate that you've raised it. Or it could set the tone that, no, that's a career limiting move. Don't raise a problem, hide it, because if you raise a problem, I'm going to blame you and I'll humiliate you. And so what we're talking about there is really, it goes back to the leadership. It's deep inside the leader, right? You're either got this depth of inside you as a leader in your psychology that I'm going to blame the person and I'm going to give them a hiding and they won't do it again. Or, and if you've got that habit, so you've got this habit as a leader where, really when someone makes a mistake, I go them. And you want to alter your behavior to be, when someone makes a mistake, I want to be inquisitive. I want to understand it. I then want to really actually thank them for raising it and helping them, then help empower them to fix it, to understand the root cause and fix it. How could you play that out to alter habit in a leader where you're physically going from that headspace to the second headspace?
Yeah,
the cue's there, isn't it? Like the cue is a person comes to me with a problem, and the cue is I'm going to go them, or the cue could be I'm going to take it off of them and deal with it myself. There's a number of behaviors that could happen, but the cue is someone says, Mark, we've got a problem.
Yeah, to me, that's not that leader's fault. That's an issue with the organisation as a whole, that they're not celebrating the losses, and they're not celebrating the fact that we don't get anywhere and we don't learn unless we make mistakes. And it's one thing that I work with organisations a lot with, because it is a big issue here in Australia. It doesn't happen as much in the US, because in the US they celebrate losses, right? They actually celebrate people who have gone bankrupt. In the US you can get bankrupt and then you can start another company the next day, because as far as they're concerned, you've just learned a whole bunch of stuff, and you're going to be really successful in your next one, or your next one, or your next one. And so, there'll be entrepreneurs over in the US who have had 3 or 4 companies go bankrupt before they actually get a company, start a company. Whereas here in Australia, you go bankrupt, you're screwed, right? That's it, which is ridiculous. And it's actually really counterintuitive as a cognitive scientist, a cognitive neuroscientist, because we know that our brains actually learn by making mistakes. So I'll give you a really simple example. If you're in a classroom, as a teacher, and you ask the class a question, and a bunch of kids put up their hands, the kids who put up their hands and answer it correctly, they didn't learn anything, right? Because they already knew the answer, so they didn't learn anything. The kids that didn't know the answer, that would have got it wrong, they've learned something, because they would have got it wrong and they learned from that. And similarly, when you do tests and something, again, the crazy thing in Australia is we get kids to do all these tests, and then we don't go over their wrong answers afterwards, because that's the most important learning exercise anyone can learn to do. And again, in the business, actually learning that, hey, this is a mistake that's been made, and we can improve our business by actually looking at this and working out how we can do it better, is an opportunity for the business to actually move forward rather than stagnating. So it's a real change in the business, right? In the business approach. And it's not just that leader's problem, it's actually the organization's problem. And that organization isn't going to flourish because it's never actually going to learn from anything. And that's what we need to change, especially here in Australia, is that it's really important to fail, because failing is a huge opportunity to learn and actually move things forward. And so you want people to come to you with problems and to come with you with mistakes, so that you can change things, so that you can get things working better, rather than hiding the mistakes, or you taking it and then you trying to solve it rather than letting them solve it, because them solving it, again, is going to move it all forward, because they're going to solve more problems and more problems and more problems. And they're going to see problems, and they're going to come to you with problems, right? And then they come to you with little problems that may not have been much of a problem, but could have sent you in another direction, which would have, be really, really cool. And if you look at a lot of organizations, they're really cool stuff they come up with is often because of a mistake, or because something goes wrong, or, I think of the pot stickers in China, right? That was a chef who stuffed up, and then he tasted it, and it tasted really good. And now pot stickers are sold all around the world, right? I mean, these are huge opportunities to learn what we're doing wrong, but also to maybe find something new in the organisation. So yeah, I would say it is a real problem, and it's also, as you said, a real problem for psychological safety within that group, because psychological safety not only is really important for the staff to know that it's safe, and they can come up with new ideas, but also that they can make mistakes and that they won't be trodden on for that, right? Because the mistakes are the most important thing. I mean, if you're brainstorming, you want people to come up with stupid ideas, because that's when you come up with the weird ideas, and then maybe a couple of good ideas in all of that. So yeah, that's what I'd say. I'd say it's the organisation that needs to change.
Yeah, so if you look at it, Mark, I don't know your thoughts, and please critique this, mate. I sort of say that the leadership shadow is powerful, that you can nearly see a leadership shadow from the top through, and the shadow can break, right? There can be a leader's behavior in that chain to the front line that is different, and it alters the shadow, Yeah. But if we look at it, right, the shadow can go all the way up to our politicians. And I'm sort of thinking, let's not start there, because in Australia, it's frickin' brutal with the way they blame each other. It's like constant mudslinging. And I think it makes most people sick nowadays. I think in the past, they must have thought it helped them win an election. I don't know if it does nowadays, although I hope it doesn't. But if we go, let's start at the board. So we're saying the board can cast a shadow on the senior leadership team. And you got the chairman of the board who wants to alter his or her habit to start to build more psychological safety in the company. But he or she is a traditional power broker where he or she has trodden on people and, blame people and knife people and done all that. And they go, whoa, I want to change my ways. I want to be inquisitive. I want to actually celebrate and recognize mistakes and empower people to fix them. How could he or she go about altering that direction of behavior when a cue's difficult, because they're probably still going to be in the same environment? But what can they play with, mate, to shift their direction where they're actually going to shift their attitude? And it's like virtually getting down to a belief factor, isn't it, mate? Down to deep-setted values.
Yeah, it's more of the belief. It's a matter of first, knowledge is power, right? So actually sitting down with whoever it is that you want to change and actually explaining to them how brain works, right? That's actually how brains work, and our brains are constantly creating our hypotheses based on what's out there in the world and what is good for us. And then when we make a mistake, our brain then goes, oh, that hypothesis was wrong, so this one's right. So that's how the world actually is. And that's how all our brains work. So, explaining that and getting them to understand that, I think is stage one. And then stage two is to get them to see that this works, and to get them to see, and get them to be willing to be vulnerable and see how important that is. Now, there's lots of different ways you can get that sort of thing, but one way would be to get this person or this group of leaders and take them to a preschool, get them to spend a week in a preschool hanging out with preschoolers and just having fun, right? And they're vulnerable then, and they're going to have to be vulnerable to actually be in that environment with each other, right? You want to have a couple of them there so they're all doing it together, and get them to do painting with their hands and playing in the sand and all these things, right? To actually get back to, hey, this is how we make mistakes, or take them away somewhere where they've got to rely on each other to make something, but it's got to be together, right? They've actually got to do it together rather than doing it separately. And so you've got to somehow concretely show them, first tell them how it works, and so they can understand that, which they're all intelligent people that have to be to get to those levels, but then show them how that actually works in real life. And so doing something fun like that, where A, they've got to be vulnerable, and B, they're making mistakes to actually end up in a better place, in a place that actually works, I think is really important for them. And there's lots of different ways, as I said, to do that. Making a raft out of a bunch of stuff that doesn't work and ending up in the water a few times before you actually get it right, and things like that, where they can have a laugh with each other, and they're actually going to realize they're all humans and they're all vulnerable and they're all going to make mistakes, but that's going to make the whole thing work better. I think is really important as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Mark, after you've given them that insight and you've got the leaders on that path where they're like, right, okay, this is good stuff, I believe in it. I've heard mentioned a lot of the time then it's about having the desire, that motivation to change, but then practice, like repeat. What's your views on that? You hear people talk about the myelin factor and what plays out there. Do you mind explaining it from your view then, what happens after that insight's gained and that motivation's built to then form new habit? Yeah,
so it's called Hebbian learning. And the saying goes, cells that fire together wire together. So all the cells that are all firing together are going to wire together. And so if your opus operandum is someone comes to me with a mistake and I'm going to just nail them, so that I feel good about myself, then that's what's happened lots and lots of times. And so all neurons associated with doing that have become really strong. And so when someone comes to you, they're the ones that fire strongest rather than others. And your brain is basically has billions of neurons, and it's basically a race of the neurons as to which way you actually go whenever you're making a decision. And so the ones that have been reinforced and got really strong through Hebbian learning, which is those that fire together, wire together, they're going to be the strongest, and so they're going to activate quickest, and so therefore that's the way you're going to go. So what you want to do is constantly practice on these ones over here, through Hebbian learning, and by doing this over and over again, those ones will wire together stronger, and these ones will slowly atrophy because of neuroplasticity. We know if you're not doing something much, then these ones slowly atrophy, these ones get stronger. And so eventually someone comes to you and makes a mistake, and this is going to be your automatic response rather than this. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of practice, and you are going to make errors. But doing it and being conscious of it is really important. And that's why, people have those little sayings and stuff on their windows or on the mirrors or whatever, to constantly remind them to do whatever behavior it is that they want to do. The easiest way to change a habit, of course, is to change that cue. But sometimes like this, you can't do that, right? You can't stop people from coming to you with complaints or with errors. And you don't want to stop that, right? So you don't want to stop the cue. So therefore, you've got to change the behavior. And that's much harder than if you could change the actual cue itself. But that's how it actually works.
I don't know if it's a good example, but I've read a story once where a leader, he put in a habit. I don't know if there's a good example or bad, but he put in a new habit that it was when someone come to him with a problem, he'd say, look, and he'd built a habit that what he's going to say first is, hey, why don't you walk back down the stairs and up the stairs and have a think while you're doing it? What could you do? What would you do? And then come to me. So the one habit he worked to try was to catch himself from just giving them a solution. So he was just give him the answer, give him the answer, give him the answer. The habit he just worked on forming was one thing, which was to say, catch himself, and then basically say, hey, grab the exercise, walk down, walk back up. And as you come back up, I'm keen for you to think about what you do, what your ideas are. And then eventually everyone would always come to him with ideas. And that was a path.
Yeah, that's a cool one. It goes back to when I teach. I often work with. I find that a lot of executives, especially, have trouble with communication, and it's not with them being able to stand in front of an audience and actually speak to people, but it's with them actually listening to other people and actually listening to what they have to say. And one of the things that we don't do much anymore that we used to do a lot is we used to actually stop and think before we answered someone. And that was standard practice. Now people either talk over each other, or as soon as one person stops, the next person will actually start talking. And if you're doing that, then you're not listening to the person, right? Because you've talked straight away. And so you actually haven't had time to actually listen and process what they're actually saying. So when I do work with executives, we do a session on communication. And one of the aspects of that is you have to have a pause. And the pause is important. And a lot of people now feel as though the pause suggests that you're not as intelligent or something. I don't know why. I don't know why people don't do it. But you've got to have the pause. And it shows the person who's speaking to you that you're thinking about what they said. So it actually shows a lot of respect for them. And people actually like it when you do it. But second, it gives you an opportunity to stop and think about, hey, how am I going to respond to this? Which is similar to your example where you tell them to go away and come back once they've had to think about it. But it gives you an opportunity as the executive or as a leader to actually stop and think and go, hang on, my normal response would be to do A, but I'm not going to do A, I'm going to do B. And to always, give yourself that opportunity to think before you actually respond, rather than being on this. We've all got to be, because we're all busy, right? Well, we all think we're busy. We're actually not productive anymore. We're just busy. And that's part of that busyness, right? We're all just responding to each other and not actually listening to each other. So we've got to stop and we've got to listen to each other. So I think, teaching people how to do that, I think is really important. Teaching people how to communicate properly is really important.
That's a cool cue, isn't it? Because it's so simple. It's like, just practice that moment to think before you actually answer and choose that pathway you want to practice.
Yeah.
What neurons do you want to fire together?
Yeah, exactly. And so you can actually retrain your brain to actually fire those ones. And if your business, if the organizations has a really good motto or a really good ethos around we're always positive, then, and you're constantly drumming that into everyone from, the CEO and the board down, and everyone's trying to live that, then each time you have that pause, then you think that, we're going to be positive, right? And then your response is going to be positive. It has to be positive because that's what your organization's about, or whatever it happens to be. But if you have a positive thing that everybody is working towards and everyone in the organization, then that's what everyone's going to think every time they pause, and that's what's going to come out rather than something which isn't so positive.
That's really cool. I was just listening to a story from a guy called Tom Burbage. He led the F-35 strike fighter program. Have you heard it already?
I've heard heard an article on it. Yeah. Somebody
He's
was talking about it. I can't remember who it was.
And he had all these competitors. Basically, the strike fighter was basically a temporary organization, or an organization formed with multiple competitors in there. It wasn't just Lockheed team members. There was Grumman and there was Boeing team members in there.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing he did that I thought was really cool was he onboarded, and he was always there when he could be, or one of his leaders meeting their new employees, and he always spoke to the values. They had values, and they had 10 behaviors linked to that. But then they'd start every meeting with sharing about the behaviors and what people have seen, and celebrate great work around the culture and the behaviors. Is that what you're talking about, Mark? Is that a similar type of concept?
Exactly, yeah. So you've got to have something within the organisation which is, this is the way we treat each other. This is the way and at every meeting and whatever it is, you want to have signs up that say, we are positive, and we treat each other with respect, or we acknowledge mistakes, or we triumph over mistakes, or we believe mistakes are. Yeah. So a couple of those which everybody knows and everyone believes in. And they're constantly, everyone's constantly reminded of them. It should be on your website. It should be, in every meeting. And the leaders should be asking everybody. I heard, I forget who it was, but was saying, that you should be able to go into an organization and ask everybody from the CEO all the way down to the cleaner, what are your mottos? And they should be able to spurt them out to you. And it doesn't matter who it is in the organization. It should be just like that. You meet someone in the elevator and say, name one of our mottos. And they should be able to go like that straight away. And so that's the way you want it. Because you want everybody to feel as though they're part of this. And this is the way we all treat each other, right? And then you don't get these silos where you'll have a silo which is positive and is actually embracing change, but another one where it's very negative and no one wants to work there and doesn't want to work with this manager, or you know what I mean? So then you won't get that, because everyone knows this is the way it's supposed to be. And if you're not on board with that, then you'll leave, because it'll drive you nuts, right? You'd be like, I don't want to be part of this crazy place where everyone's walking around saying, let's be positive and let's treat each other nicely. Which is good, because you probably don't want those people there anyway.
No, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? I once had a mate of mine, Russell Warner, say to me a profound thing. He said, Brad, culture change happens through a million conversations. I don't know your thoughts on that. It sounds like the topic we're talking on a little bit, where if you've defined those behaviors and those values and those behaviors, and you have a million conversations about them, and people believe in them and share willingly stories and are motivated by it, you'll get some habit change out of that, because those norms will start to become wide. You're firing those neurons. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly, because it's just going to be constantly reinforced. The heavy and learning is going to be happening all the time. And so there isn't going to be any... there's always going to be understanding that this is the culture of this organization, and I mean that happens in places like Google, and also places like BMW and Ducati and all these places. If you go to those places, everybody knows what the ethos is. Everybody knows what they're aiming for. Everybody's on board with it, and some of those places, especially like BMW and Ducati and these places, the workers, the people working there are often second and third generation, because they families believe in these organizations and trust these organizations and trust where they're going. And I mean, that's what you want to create, right? Because losing employees is expensive, and onboarding is expensive, and onboarding takes time, and you lose all that experience and everything every time you lose someone. So you want people to stay for long periods of time, and you want them to be entrenched in your company, but not entrenched in a bad way. You want them entrenched in a way which is positive, and they're actually keen to improve things and keen to keep the company going and keen for their kids to come and work there as well. I mean, that's when you got a really cool company, right?
Yeah, you got that legacy going through. I remember, Mark, I was a contractor. I was a technology contractor into Autoliv in Melbourne, Broadmeadows in Melbourne. And I now know the managing director from there, Seamus, who previously was the managing director. And you could go to any employee there and say, what are you guys about? And they go, well, we save lives. It was the first thing that came out of their mouth. Mate, airbags and seatbelts. We save lives. And then you could ask about you go, well, what's your culture about over here? And they go, well, boom, boom, boom. This is what we're about. And this is how it was like, wow, that was slick.
That's what you want. That's where you want to get to, right? Yeah. And if you're trying to change culture, that's what you're aiming for everybody to be on board, and it to be positive for the company and in the right direction. And anyone who's not will leave. Yeah.
Mate, one thing I struggle with, I've heard a lot of orators over the years talk about, values, don't ever mess with values. Values are fixed. They're locked. They're it forever. But the thing that I'm challenged with from that angle is that if you're trying to alter and improve culture because things are changing in the world, and maybe your old value used to be structure and stayed, and we stay the line and we don't, but all of a sudden you're like, we need to build agility, and, those orators that are talking about values being fixed, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? Because I'm a bit like, wow, okay, you might have to actually alter culture and go a different path on a different value and behavior to survive.
Yeah. I wouldn't say values are fixed in any way, shape, or form, because society's changing, and society's changing rapidly now. I wouldn't say you'd want to change your values every 12 months or every 5 years even, but there's definitely a need for you to reevaluate your values on a semi-regular basis and make sure that they align with where the company's going and with society, right? Companies work within society, and society's changing. And if your values don't align with that, with your marketplace, which is society really most of the time, right, or part of society, then you really need to change it. Otherwise, you're going to die off, right? So no, I wouldn't at all say, stick with your values. No.
Yeah, like you say,
not if they're not aligned.
Yeah, and like you're saying, you mightn't dramatically revamp the whole thing. It might be there's just a tweak we've got to make, or we need to basically alter this one to this now because this is where society's going, or our customers are going, or where we've got a real challenge culturally that we need to lift.
Yeah, and I find it's not usually that the values are wrong. It's usually either that nobody knows what the values are, because they're somewhere in a document somewhere and they've been put away and there's dust all over it, is usually one of the problems, or they don't have any really defined values, right? They just don't exist because no one's ever actually gone through the process of working out what the values of the company are. So you've got to have them defined, and you've got to have them out there smacked in everyone's faces, so that everyone knows who they are, what they are, and working around those values. Otherwise, they're pretty useless. But I don't find that. I find that most companies, it's not that they don't have good values. It's that they're usually hidden away somewhere, or they don't have them at all.
And I'm guessing too, Mark, most values in a company are quite universal, but the behaviors you pin against them of what does this look like? Well, that's quite easy to alter. Potentially nearly the stories you tell and the behaviors you associate with them can alter easily, whereas the values may stay locked, to hold that foundation, but the rest can be changed through behaviors. And the descriptive off of it that defines actually exactly what it is, and we tell stories about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could have a value that where traditional, right? And traditional could mean multiple different things depending on the way you actually then put the behaviours behind that and actually work out how you're going to define traditional, right? Traditional could be, family oriented and making sure everyone has time with their family, and whereas traditional could be you work your ass off and it's all structured and you always do what the manager says and no one does, right? So you can change, how people feel about and how people behave in relation to those values and redefine those. Because the values, as you said, most of the values are fairly generic across organisations. Am I allowed to say that? Probably not allowed to say that. They all spend so much money on their values.
I know, but they're pretty similar. You could nearly map them all together.
Yeah.
Respect.
There's probably probably half a dozen that they all tag onto.
We're humans, aren't we? Like,
exactly.
Are humans in one company different dramatically to humans in another company?
And all companies are within society, right? And as I said, your market is society, and so how society sees how we should all treat each other is the way, those values are set up. But how society's working now is changing, and so we need to realise that and add that, incorporate that into our organisations at a real level. That change.
Well, I really love the insight so far, Mark, because we've spoken about one thing you can alter straight away is the cue, that environment, that factor, which is a rapid change. And then the other thing we've spoken about is the pause, just taking that pause to think and choose to practice that new neural pathway, or those neurons that fire together, bind together. And then the other thing we've spoken about is the power of values and behaviors, and the million conversations that Russell mentioned every day throughout the organization. I do love bringing purpose to the fore too, with what I saw at Autoliv. What they spoke about there was their purpose and then the values too. But that was really, really powerful. You mentioned before the show, Mark, that there can be a different consideration or something else to think about with frontline team member behavior and leadership behavior. We've been talking a lot about leadership behavior. When it comes to the broader cultural change where many employees are, frontline leadership and frontline team members, are there any different nuances there you'd talk about with habit change and improving forward?
So with the process is pretty much the same. It's just that you've got to, I think, the more people you're working with, the more people you're trying to change, the more difficult it's going to be, because you're always going to get a few who don't want to change, and those are going to then spread that don't change across. And so you really need to be careful to work with all the people and get them all on board, and that's going to take time, because you're going to have to work in small groups with each of those. You can't just get them all into do a public event and have 1,000 people in it say we're going to change this, and all you factory workers are now going to do this differently, and you're all going to like it, and if you don't, then you can leave. That's going to cause huge problems, right? And so you need to get each of those on board within their groups, but people don't like just being told what to do. So you need to explain why you're doing it, what you're doing and why you're doing it, and how it's actually going to benefit them. Because people don't like a change, full stop, right? I mean, there's a lot of nonsense I see on a lot of social media things at the moment around, everyone loves change. No, people don't like change, right? People actually like to just stick to what they're doing. And so you've got to give them a reason to do that. So explaining why you're doing it, how it's going to benefit them in some way, whether or not it's, the company's going to be doing better, so you're going to have more opportunity for promotion, or whether or not the company's going to be doing better, so everyone's going to get paid more, or whatever it happens to be. But you've got to explain how this is actually going to benefit them, or you're going to be able to go home earlier because, these systems are going to be quicker, and so you don't have to. So you need to explain why it's going to benefit them, and therefore why they should go through this process of change. Otherwise, they'll keep doing the same thing, regardless of whether or not, you've told them, they have to, or their managers are constantly telling them they'll have to. So those are important things to establish, but you've got to do that in small groups. You can't do that in a large Because if you're doing a large group, people just aren't going to listen, and then there's going to be dissent. So those are the things that I would do. So first, I would work with leadership on what the changes are and how they're actually going to work, and again, why we're doing it, how it's going to benefit everybody, and then get them to work with smaller groups that they know, because again, you've got to work with an in-group. So some leaders are really good at having all their employees part of the in-group. I mean, Branson, right? He's amazing at being this I'm Virgin, and everyone believes they're part of Virgin, and they actually go to Virgin because they want to be like Branson and they want to, wear the red. And so, but he's a rarity, right? Most leaders aren't like that. And so therefore, most leaders, once you get 2 or 3 steps down, there's a disconnect between the two. So what you want to do is get the ones that are closer to where they feel as though those guys actually teaching them. And I don't, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I don't like it when a consultant comes in and they try to do it, because they don't have connection with those people, right? They need to actually talk to the leaders who can then talk to the next step down, and then the next step down can talk to the next step down, and so on, rather than have, this guy come out, let's do in front of 1,000 people and then expect them all to come on board.
I totally agree, Mark. It's been, I remember David Rock, he once wrote an article about cascading culture change and cascading and improvement. And I thought, he's a fellow Australian, and I thought, man, he did a good job. He was the first guy I saw on that. And the other thing too, mate, is like you're saying, you want to fire those new neurons together, and the consultant's not around all the time to do it. No. And then if the consultant's doing it, the leaders don't own it. And if the leaders don't own it, no one's helping people fire those neurons all the time. And so the whole thing, and then the leader typically feels awkward because he or she probably doesn't properly understand it.
Doesn't really believe in it, right? They're not. Yeah. You've got to believe in it. You've got to believe that this is actually going to help. This is going to actually result in these changes. So you've got to get that belief across the line too. And also, there's some great research now showing just putting EEG caps on a group of people who are working together, and showing the ones that actually are connected, have a relationship with each other, that all their neurons start actually oscillating with each other, so they all sync up, and those people actually learn more from each other because they're synced up, and then that happy learning all works stronger with each other, which is crazy. We never thought that was. It's some recent research that's been coming out, and that's really cool. And so if you get a consultant coming in, they're not going to be connected with this whole group of people, so they're never going to sync up, right? So there's going to be this real disconnect between the two, and so that's not going to happen. So yeah, you really need to do that downstream, constant, jumping from one to the next, so you can slowly go down the groups, and then go back up the groups. So I think that's also, I forget who talked about, where once you've done all the training and everyone's supposedly on board, then get a couple of members from the lower group to actually explain to the ones at the top what they've actually learned, because of course you can get Chinese whispers going on, where what ends up being told to the people on the floor is actually completely different than what was discussed at the top. So you also need to constantly check, which we know, right, by a lot of the different systems that are in organisations now. The Chinese whispers is a big problem in a lot of organisations, and so we do need to be constantly checking that what we're saying is actually what people are hearing.
Yeah, Mark, that's really cool. In a game I'm involved in a lot, there's a thing called leading from the front, where leaders will all spend time at the front line, up and down the levels, and just to learn, and to me, that seems like such a great check mechanism. I think they call it, in Japanese, they call it going to the real place. They got a name for it, Gemba, you've probably heard of it. But yeah. I just love it for that. Going to check is what is reality? What is actually happening,
Yeah.
And then you can take decision on that, can't you? You can look to coach and support wherever you need to.
Yeah, no, it is. It's really important. And it's, I think it's difficult for a lot of very senior people to do, but I think if they can do that, and again, it's that your whole humility thing, right? Being vulnerable, being willing to actually go, because somebody who's in the boardroom every day is not going to understand how to do these things, so they are going to have to be vulnerable to be down there actually doing the actual day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
Which is really important, to be vulnerable and show your employees that you're willing to do that and make mistakes, which is really cool. And then that all goes back to that psychological safety, right, that we're talking about to begin with. that all of the leaders need to show psychological safety and need to be respectful of their employees and need to show that they're vulnerable as well, and we all make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes, and that's actually going to push us forward. And by doing that, because they're going to make mistakes when they're down in the trenches, right? Because they're not going to know what's going on, and they're going to actually have to learn the processes and so on. So yeah, it's awesome for that whole systems approach, and to get that psychological safety really working across the organisation.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, mate. And like at the start of the show, you and I are talking about that, leadership behaviour, and then connected with the processes or systems of a company, how it's all interwoven. And I was just thinking back on Branson as you're talking, mate. I thought, far out, I think Branson, he actually did leading from the front. He does it very well in some regards. Okay, it's often in a hangar at a party with all the staff where he's networking like crazy around all the team and at the horse races and things like that. But that's his style. But I'm guessing when he goes to those events, he learns. I'm sure he learns while he's mixing with everyone.
Yeah, and I've never personally met him, but from as a humanist, as someone who likes viewing behaviour, he's obviously very humble too. And even though I know he's very introverted, so to do those things, I know it takes a lot out of him to when he actually comes out and goes, and has a champagne and everything. But then as soon as that stops, he is very individual focused, so that he will then actually talk to each of the staff members and talk to on a very individual level, and he's very interested in people, so yeah, he does have that persona, but it's very different to who he really is. And so once the cameras go off, he actually does, because you can imagine people actually probably wouldn't like him if he was like that all the time, whereas because he's not actually like that all the time, and that's just for the cameras, then everybody actually really likes him, because they realize that's just for the cameras and that's really cool and this is his brand. But then he's a real person who's put in his real heart and soul into this whole process.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, mate, I've really valued this conversation, like habit change, mate. If you had 2 minutes on the topic of habit change to summarize everything, mate, what would be your summary of how to go about really getting good habit change throughout an organization to move towards excellence more?
Yeah, I think one thing would be just to remember how important habits are, because we know that between 40 and 60% of what everybody does every day is just habitual. It's just habitual, and people don't think about it. It's done automatically. So if you think about, even it's only 40% of everybody's day, you can actually improve that. You can get them more productive. You can get them, more innovative. You can actually get them always thinking about improving your organization. Then it's a really important thing to be always considering. But yeah, always consider that loop, that it's a cue, and then the behavior of the thought, and then the reinforcer that actually causes that to get stronger, which causes the heavy and learning to go on there. And so get rid of the cue. And if you can't get rid of the cue, make the habit hard. If you want to get rid of a bad habit, if you want to create a new habit, link it to a cue or make it really easy for the employees to do. And so, yeah, it's a really simple loop, and it's really simple. Obviously, in practice, there's always some nuances to it, but that's what I would really try to get across is A, it's a lot of what we do, so it's really important, and B, it's just that cue and behavior. And reinforces the loop. So try and change one of those.
Yeah, that's awesome, Mark. Mark, I really appreciate your time and knowledge, mate, and everything you have done and continue to do to help create a better future. Mate, how can people, again, get hold of your new book, Connected Species, and how can they reach out to you, mate, if they want to learn more and connect?
Yeah, so Connected Species is now available here in Australia. It's been sent out, so I've got lots of emails from people saying, "Can you sign it for me?" But yeah, any of your bookshops, I've been told by the publisher, I have to say, wherever you like getting your books, I'm not allowed to tag any particular bookshop because that's naughty. So anywhere you like getting your books, it's just the Connected Species, Mark Williams, you'll get it. And then if you want to get in touch with me, just go to Dr. Mark Williams, drmarkwilliams.com, drmarkwilliams.com, and you can, either sign up to my newsletter. There's lots of stuff on there you can read, and you can get in touch with me, email me, and we can have a chat if you want to have a chat. Nice and easy. I make life really easy for people.
I appreciate it, Mark. Thanks so much, mate, for everything, mate. Really appreciate it. Amazing conversation.
Thank you, Fred. It was great. Always
Cheers,
great.
mate. Bye
Thanks,
for now.
mate.
What a great episode. Remember, you can get hold of the key behaviour review form to help you, lead out your excellence journey and improve behaviour ongoing as a team or an individual. Go to the enterpriseexcellencepodcast.com/downloads to get hold of it. There were 2 key takeaways for me from this episode. First of all was the habit loop and the simple process of breaking this to help foster behaviour change. Looking at the cue, that meeting room we go into, can we adjust it, go to a different meeting room, which we can then lead out different behaviours rather than have that constant trigger or cue of going into that particular meeting room. Also, the other key takeaway for me was the power of neurons that fire together, wire together, and those constant conversations around ideal behaviour, values, purpose, and these things that leaders can bring to life every day to fire those neurons in people and to help create culture change through a million conversations. Thanks again for your time and knowledge, Mark. Thanks for helping us create a better future. Bye for now.